This brief video is going to be about how to graph PPFs, how to calculate opportunity costs, how to determine terms of trade that make sense, and then finally how to draw PPFs after trade. So all these have calculations that underlie them, and questions of these sorts have become quite popular in past WACE exams and mock exams. So just to make you guys ready for potential ones, I've put this short video together. So the first thing that you need to be able to do is to graph PPFs. So pretty straightforward, but we'll do it anyway. So x-axis over here, we're going to put that down as one of the goods that is being produced. So say clothing. Y-axis is going to be computers. So we're just going to stick to Australia for now. Australia, if we all use our resources to create only clothing, we're able to produce 16 units. So I've put 16 over there. On the other hand, if we are using all our resources to produce computers, that's going to end up with 8 computers being produced, and that, once we draw a straight line between the two points, gives us Australia's PPF, so Australia over here. You can do the same thing for Japan, but for now we'll stick with Australia. The next thing that we want to do is we want to be able to calculate opportunity costs. So the reason that's important is because we can determine which country will specialize in producing which good. The easiest way to calculate opportunity costs is to consider one country and one good first and follow these steps. So let's say we are considering Australia and we want to calculate the opportunity cost of producing computers. What does it actually mean? It means one needs to be given up in order for Australia to produce 1 unit of computers. How do we do that? We have a look at the other good, in this case clothing. We put this number, which is the total it can produce, up the top of a fraction. We divide it by the total number of goods that it can produce that we're thinking about. So the opportunity cost of computers in this case, we'll put it down at the bottom, and that will give us 2. So remember, when we're calculating the opportunity cost of computers here, the unit of that opportunity cost will just be the other good, which in this case is 2 units of clothing. So in words, if Australia were to want to produce an additional unit of computer, so 1 more computer, it needs to give up 2 units of clothing. So what is an opportunity cost? It's just what's forgotten, right? Now, if we wanted to calculate all the other opportunity costs, we do the same thing. So if we're thinking about calculating the opportunity cost for Australia of producing clothing, an additional unit of clothing, it's 8 over 16, and that gives us half. If it's the case that we want to calculate Japan's opportunity costs for producing computers, it's going to be 20 over 20, which is going to be 1, and the same for its opportunity costs for producing clothing as well. So units will be important here. So we'll go clothing for this, and then on the right hand side we have computers and computers. And if we make this into a table, we can see quite easily what the opportunity costs for each of these countries are. So I'm just going to clean this up a bit, and we'll go down the bottom. It'll be Japan, then it'll be Australia, and then we have computers over here, and then we have clothing over here. Right, now that we've got all the opportunity costs, now we want to determine which country will specialize in which good. It's all about the lower opportunity costs, because the lower costs are more efficient. So for computers, for example, Japan has only an opportunity cost of 1, and that means Japan will produce computers. On the other hand, for clothing, Australia has an opportunity cost of half, and that's lower than Japan's 1. And as a result, Australia will specialize in producing pieces of clothing. Now that we've got that out of the way, we need to then determine what is it that the terms of trade's boundaries will be. So remember, countries will only trade if it's mutually beneficial for them to trade. So what is the exchange rate? You could say that will be mutually beneficial for both. So I'm going to just quickly draw the opportunity cost table again. So down the bottom over here, so computers and then clothing, it's going to be 2 units of clothing, then 1 unit down here, and then half computer, and then 1 computer. Okay, the easiest way to calculate the bounds of the terms of trade is by considering one good and then using the opportunity costs for both countries to be the boundaries. So let's say we'll consider clothing on the right side. Australia's opportunity cost for producing an additional piece of clothing is half, so that's going to be the lower bound of the terms of trade. The upper bound is going to be Japan's opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of clothing, which is going to be 1. So half and 1. To make things a bit easier, I'm going to put the unit as well. So any terms of trade in between half and 1 is going to be worth doing because both countries benefit. What do I mean by that? Let's explore. So on the right side, this opportunity cost, half units of computers, is going to make sense. Let's say I'm going to put down over here, Australia is going to be exporting clothing, because remember, it has the lower opportunity cost out of the two countries. And Japan over here is going to be importing clothing. Okay, so if we think about it from Australia's point of view, Australia will be willing to export clothes as long as it receives more than half a computer in return. So any of these areas over here, why is that? It's because if it doesn't trade and it wants to reallocate its resources within its own economy, it can receive half a computer in return for one piece of clothing. That's its structure of the economy at work. If it can get more than half, it's better. So the return will be higher. So if Australia can find a country, let's say like Japan, which is willing to give it more than half computer in return for one piece of clothing, it's going to jump on that because that's a better return. That's why everything to the right of the left boundary makes sense to Australia. Now, from Japan's point of view, they are importing clothing. If Japan isn't trading and they are looking to reorganize their resources in order to gain an additional unit of clothing, they will need to sacrifice one computer. That's, again, the nature of their economy. However, if they find a trading partner who is willing to give them one piece of clothing in return for less than one computer, so again, a better situation than they have as their own economy prior to trade, they're going to jump on that because they're giving away fewer computers. So let's say, for argument's sake, if Australia is willing to give Japan one piece of cloth or clothing in return for 0.9 units of computers, Japan will say, sure, because that is less of a sacrifice than one computer that it would have to do prior to trade. So that means anything to the left of the right boundary makes sense for Japan. All right, so now that we've established the boundaries of the terms of trade, we need to choose the terms of trade and then see how we graph that. So for argument's sake, let's say the terms of trade is going to be one piece of clothing for 2/3 unit of a computer. So that's going to be the terms of trade. So let's see what that looks like. So I'll rewrite that again. One piece of clothing for 2/3 unit of computers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to redraw the PPF for Australia prior to trade. So that's going to be clothing, computers. It's going to be 16 and 8, straight line, and that's going to be Australia. Now, we know that the terms of trade that the two countries have agreed on is one clothing for 2/3 computers. How do we even begin to draw the new PPF post-trade or after trade? The easiest way to do that is to start at the axis for the good your country specializes in. We know that Australia specializes in clothing. So this over here is going to be point A. Now, what do we do next? So remember, the PPF is going to be a line which shows you the combination of goods that an economy can produce at the very maximum. With trade, it considers how much of the good an economy is willing to import. So that's going to expand the PPF because now the economy can import from another country that's more efficient at producing that good it's importing. What does that all mean? It means the PPF shifts out for the good that the country is importing. For Australia's case, it's computers. You can see over here, it is currently 8, but if Australia decides to import, it can increase from 8. What does it increase to? Depends on the terms of trade. So how do we find out what this limit will be? All you need to assume is Australia sells all of its clothing. So everything it specializes in, it sells all of it based on the terms of trade that they've agreed to. So terms of trade is 2/3. Australia can specialize and produce 16 units of clothing. How do we find out what it gets in return? All you do is do 16 units of clothing multiplied by the terms of trade, which is 2/3 computers, and that's going to give you 10.67 units of computers. So what does it mean? It means that if Australia sells all 16 units of its clothing at the terms of trade of 2/3, it'll receive 10.67 computers. This is now a point B. So let's put point B over here, and we've now created a new PPF once we join point A and point B. That's it. That's a new PPF. If the question then perhaps asks you to graph a particular point on the PPF, that could be a task you're able to do. Let's assume that Australia decides to only sell 2 units of clothing in exchange for some computers, and we're required to graph that on the PPF. What you need to do there is multiply 2, which is the number of pieces of clothing, by the terms of trade, which is 2/3, and that's going to give us, let's have a look, 4/3. So actually what I'll do is I'll make the number easier to work with. I'll make it a whole number. So let's say instead of selling 2 units of clothing, Australia sells 3. So 3 units of clothing times the terms of trade. That means in return we receive 2 computers. Okay, now if Australia is selling 16 units of clothing, it means it no longer has 16 units of clothing in its state of the economy. It now has 14. So what's going to happen is, oh, my mistake. It's going to have 13. So we're taking 3 away. So it's going to be somewhere over here. So it's going to be 13 units of clothing. And what's going to happen then is Australia is now going to receive 2 units of computers. If you wanted to label that as coordinates, you could say it's 13 and 2. And that is the point on the new PPF that Australia is at if they decide to sell 2 units of clothing for the terms of trade of 2/3 computers. If anything is unclear, feel free to approach me in class and we will go from there.